All right, let's go ahead and get started. Alex, do you want to unmute? There we go. Hello, Alex.
Hello, good to see you, Jason.
Likewise, you too. You too. I'm going to start out just saying hello to everyone. First of all, I'm very glad to be here today. I'm Jason Rockwood. I'm the general manager for VeChain in North America. Really glad to see everyone who's attending today. I know for those of us in the United States, especially out here on the West Coast where I am, it's pretty early. So thank you all for dialing in. Also, I know it's kind of a crazy time out there in the world today. So just want to acknowledge that while we're having this call today about business and technology, I hope everyone out there is staying nice and safe and healthy and taking good care of themselves and their families. I'd also like to just, briefly provide a little bit of an update on the U.S. market. The market has been doing very well. Of course, there was a setback. When COVID first struck, it was a little bit of a distraction, I'd say, more than anything. We didn't really know what was going on, but I think that overall, the U.S. economy and the business community in particular have done a really good job of stabilizing, and we've had a very busy last couple of months. I think that the COVID crisis and everything else has brought a lot of focus on the need for transparency in supply chains. And I think that the need for VeChain, ToolChain, and the ability to digitize the supply chain is more important now than ever before. And we're seeing a lot of interest from partners, large and small, both on the client or enterprise side, as well as from our implementation and resale partners. So I'm very optimistic about how far we've come and how far we are going. And it's a very exciting time for VeChain globally, as well as specifically here in the US. I'm very excited today to introduce to you all Producers Market. Producers Market is a project that I came across fairly early in the rollout here in the US. And Producers Market is an organization that has struck me as being very aligned with VeChain and very aligned with our mission and goal to bring transparency to the supply chain. And I'm very excited to introduce them to you today. So with that in mind, let's get started introducing Alex Karzog. Alex, hello.
Hi, thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me here and Producers Market here. And it's nice to communicate with the VeChain community. Yeah, just to give you a little background, my title, Producers Market, is Chief Project Officer. Although we're very much still a startup, so a lot of us wear many hats. Work very closely with our product team and our digital marketing team, our executive team, and finance, fundraising, everything in between. And so Producers Market has been around for about 3 years. We're really a digital platform that has the goal of empowering farmers. And what we do is really try to digitize their entire, not only their organization and their products as farmers or producers, agricultural producers, but also tell the story of their product and their eventually their supply chain. We do this through digital storytelling and digital media. And so if you went to producersmarket.com, you'd see there are organization profiles, which is essentially a digital profile, an online profile for an organization, and their product profiles. And we do the best job possible to tell the story of that producer, what makes them unique, what makes their product unique, and allow them that digital presence, but also allow transparency into their product and how that product was created. And we've changed a little bit recently. So we started off with the goal of creating a digital marketplace with transactions, and that was the goal. And so we moved forward with that development. And a little bit towards the end of last year, we realized that there's another opportunity for more in-depth storytelling around one specific product and their value chain. And so we created something called Storybird, which is a kind of a standalone transparency product for the end consumer to see the value chain of an entire product. That could be accessed through a QR code, most likely through a QR code, either on the product packaging or in a retail location. And so the end consumer can actually see the whole value chain of that product and what it is. And
Yeah, that's interesting because with ToolChain, we the core value proposition of ToolChain is being able to connect a real world product and it trace its movements through the supply chain and connect that to a QR code so that the end consumer can learn information about the product and its journey. And with Storybird, the value proposition of Storybird is so similar to what ToolChain offers at the core of its being. And I think that was what that technical and functional sort of symmetry was one of the things that was initially very appealing to me about partnering with you guys. Just the way that our products work, was very similar. And also, I really appreciated right away the focus on empowering the farmer and using storytelling as a way of giving more visibility to the farmer, and also empowering the farmer by using transparency, to make that farmer more credible, right? And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about blockchain. How does blockchain play a role in empowering that farmer?
Yeah, great question, for sure. So, I mean, our job is to tell this story through, different mediums, and so we choose, there's images, there's videos, there's certifications, there's text, right? And we weave this together and do a nice design to make this a great story. But what's the proof, right? So what's the proof and what backs up this data? So blockchain is what really verifies any of the data or any of the quote unquote claims that our producers are making about themselves or their products. So blockchain is huge, and it really puts the story together, and so this is why, like you were saying before, this is why there are a lot of synergies between what we're trying to do basing on a front end and what VeChain's doing, more for us from the back end side. So you guys are, really fueling our data verification for our storytelling for our users.
Yeah, and once you so you talked a little bit about how you sort of evolved with Storybird. Talk to us a little bit about some of your partnerships. I mean, what kind of projects are you guys working on globally? Because our audience is still just getting to know you all. I think they would be very curious to hear. One of the things that impressed me about Producers Market is just how broad both your global footprint as well as the kind of projects that you're working with. It's pretty expansive, and so I think it would be great to share some of that with the folks at home.
Sure, yeah, and I'll just back up one sec just by saying that when we started off building this marketplace, the goal was to have as many transactions on there as possible. So agricultural producers and their products selling to wholesale buyers or brands, and that was the goal. But we've now expanded out into more of this market linkage idea, and it's such a big ecosystem out there in the food system world and food production world, excuse me. And we just want to make as many introductions as we need to. So our CEO Keith has been traveling a lot the last couple of years and making amazing partnerships. And one very cool partnership that is worth noting is with the UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program, in India. So there's a project called ZBNF, Zero Budget Natural Farming. It's it's an awesome concept. It's there's no chemical inputs into the production process. And they've started, I guess, decades ago, really, and it's now being adopted as more of a scalable program, a scalable system. And so essentially, a farmer will take a hectare to start and follow this methodology of no chemical inputs. And once they have some output to use and to eat, they start it with the local school and their family. And then once they expand beyond the local school and their family, they have enough more outputs, they expand into the community. And ZBNF has this whole, a branded store, let's say. And so they basically grow it circular and in cellular format. And so this is the state of entrepreneurship in Southern India. been millions of people, very populated, and so they have the zero budget natural farming concept that's just been adopted as like, and now it's going to become the quote unquote India natural farming concept. And so we have a partnership with them to not only help them master plan and expand out the project, but also have access to other markets, outside of, because the concept is once they sell in the local communities, they can go out further, assuming they have the inputs to do it. The school, the family, the local community, the broader community, and then the state of Andhra Pradesh, and then outside of that, and then outside of the country. So we're just helping them grow, and it's a very beautiful, beautiful concept that works very well. So that's one we really enjoy. There's actually the name of the kind of nonprofit that is in charge of organizing the farmers and organizing a lot of their outputs is called RYSS, and I will butcher the name by trying to say it, so I won't, but they're an organization on our website as well, and that's really who we've been working with. And so they're like an aggregator for many farmers, like hundreds of thousands of farmers in the end for the whole state. And so we work a lot with aggregators and co-ops or farmer producer organizations, FPOs, that represent a small group or a very large group of farmers. So we don't always make a direct contact with every smallholder farmer. A lot of them don't want to deal with the business side or the marketing side, and don't need to. They want to focus on farming. And that's what those groups.
One of the things that I think is also very interesting is that your producers market seems to be finding ways to connect with millions of farmers in countries all over the world. But rather than working with the farmer individually, you're working with these different NGOs or governmental organizations that allow you to have a global reach to millions of individuals without having to work with them one by one. So you have a very interesting and scalable model that that is allows you to reach a very wide footprint. I also like the way that your sort of producers market is sort of sits in this interesting space of you're a for-profit company, and you're very much in that domain, but you're also working very closely with the general public and with NGOs and with the government as well as private companies. And so you have this very interesting mix of different types of organizations that I think you're bringing the concept of supply chain traceability to a lot of very different types of organizations. I wondered if maybe you could just speak about do you guys consider yourselves like a B Corp or a social company? Or if you could just kind of talk about that for a second.
Sure, it's a good question. I mean, yeah, we consider ourselves an impact-driven company, and we're considered a tech company, an agriculture company. You can group together and call us ad tech, but the product that we're building, the technology in our platform is just a piece of it. It's just the vision for us is to have one end-to-end app that's capturing data from the soil or the harvest for whatever that value chain is, all the way to the end consumer. And yes, there'll be different user interfaces and different types of users along the way, but essentially it's all going to be one app. And we're able to manage that communication from end to end, because some of the farmers or some of the producers would love to have that communication with the end consumer and get the feedback, and not only get the recognition, but also get the feedback of the quality of their product, and see if they can help make business decisions based on, did you like the flavor, or did you like the consistency, did you want to buy more or less? And just there's that whole communication flow is very difficult today because there's so many middlemen, right? There's all these intermediaries along the way in the food supply chain. So we're trying to break down some of those barriers.
On that note, let's come back to Storybird for a second. So with Storybird, you're gathering data and sharing it with the public so the consumer can learn more about the product. What was one of the first Storybird projects? I believe it had something to do with scallops.
Yeah, sure. So we did in November of last year, we launched our first Storybird pilot that was just for us to learn from, and we followed the journey of scallops, raw sea scallops from the northeast of the United States, off of Massachusetts, to the southwest of the United States, into a restaurant, into LA. And so we just to be clear, our whole strategy from the beginning as a company has been to be technology agnostic. So we want to include different technology providers that help us further our mission along the way. And so for this one, we we partnered with IBM and their food trust system and got to learn that a little bit. And they kind of brought in. We have a champion along with as one of the stakeholders along the way on this supply chain. And so what we did was have all the data uploaded to the blockchain from the harvester of the boat to the processor at the harbor at the dock in the Northeast, and then it shipped all the way down to Southern California to a regional distributor, and then that regional distributor sold it to a restaurant. And that was a scallops journey that we displayed in Storybird, and the end consumer accessed it through a QR code on the menu. So the Taps restaurant's called Taps, TAPS, and Taps, essentially put a QR code on their fresh catch page and said, and this was actually a very key part, was their staff knowing about it and their staff educating their consumers, saying, hey, if you guys are interested today, here's the fresh catch page. And if you really want to go deeper on these scallops, we encourage you to scan this QR code and learn more. And so that helped. And then once that happened, they had over, about 33% increase in sales and just with their scallops dish. And so you can imagine so Taps is selling more scallops, and then everyone going back upstream there it has increased sales down the road if we continue to do that.
That's
so
great.
That was our first one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, just that it's interesting to hear that in that traceability project, you already were able to see the benefits of the Storybird platform and of supply chain transparency and using supply chain data to tell the story in the actual restaurant. I mean, I think this is a big paradigm shift. One of the things that overall at a big picture level, one of the things that excites me about what VeChain is doing and what we're doing with you is just that, there's this paradigm shift occurring where we're taking data that's been hidden in the supply chain. Restaurants, the journey of the scallop from the boat to the table is, that's been going on for forever, right? As long as there have been restaurants, there's been a supply chain to that restaurant, but that information has never been visible or made public before. And it's certainly never been part of the marketing story. And now, we're able to do that. What do you think? But why blockchain? What is it about blockchain that's so important to this storytelling process? Like in your scallops example, or in the farm to table with the farmers, what is the value add that blockchain brings?
Well, from our perspective, like I said earlier, it's data validation, data verification, and it's an immutable, source saying, even for us, we're a third party compared to the retailer or the brand or anyone else in that value chain for that matter. We're a third party saying, hey, we're validating, we're vetting this whole process. And blockchain takes that a step further, and says, okay, well, even though Producers Market is validating it, here's VeChain also validating the data was actually, it happened here at this date on this date and at that location. And, it's just that immutable source of information. So,
Yeah.
And it's great because, with Taps, or not even just with scallops, let's just say in general, a lot of scallops consumers might not even know that they're actually frozen, and there's a harvest, period of the year, harvest season of the year, and the scallops they're eating might have been harvested 4 or 5 months earlier, and then frozen, of course, and then they're finally, arrived to the restaurant where you're eating it frozen, even though they're potentially being sold as, who knows what they're being sold as, if they use raw or not, or fresh or not. But it's just, I felt like a sense of pride with everyone in that supply chain to say, hey, we're coming out and saying, telling you this is how it works for scallops. If you're going to eat scallops in March in Southern California, this is how they got there, And so it's really, it's education. Really what we're doing is one of the big purposes of Storybird is just consumer education through storytelling. So they can make empowered decisions, give them the ability to make these conscious, empowered decisions about their consumption habits. And really then it also gives everyone else in the supply chain the chance to tell their story and say, hey, no one else would ever know which boat, what the name of the boating company was, the harvester for the scallops, or who the processor was who cleaned it and tested it, or who the regional distributor was, who got it into the restaurant. And so it's allowing those brands to start associating themselves with transparency. And blockchain is a huge part of that, because they're, a lot of it's hard for me to say, but for the general public in the United States, I think everybody's heard blockchain, but a lot of people just don't know what it is. So now they're able to see it literally on their plate, getting the food that goes into their body. They know blockchain had something to do with it. So
Absolutely.
pretty interesting, yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite the favorite aspects about working with VeChain is that I get to work with so many interesting partners like yourselves, and I'm learning so much about supply chain. And I'm, for example, I never knew that there was a harvest season for scallops, and that so you're educating the general public about the way that food makes it to the plate. There are these very specific harvest times, and then food gets held, and all of that, and now that's being made visible. I want to come back for a second. You mentioned that you did the Scallops project with IBM. And now, we obviously are starting to work together. You mentioned that you're a technology agnostic company. I'm curious, what did you learn? What were some of the, I don't want to overly complicate the conversation about IBM, but what is it about VeChain? Let's focus on the positives. What is it about VeChain that had you, learn something from the Scallops project with Food Trust? And now we're going to be doing some projects together. And I'm curious, like, what was the evolution, or what was it about VeChain that stood out to you and said, you know what, let's give this a shot?
Sure. Well, I mean, we've been talking too before we even worked on that pilot project. And so originally with VeChain, I saw, a younger company that had a very, very global footprint, a good, an impressive group of partners around the globe. And you guys are very flexible as a younger company and a newer company. And so that flexibility, the barrier to entry really for us as a partner and for our users to use your technology is very low. So that was, for several reasons, for onboard from an onboarding perspective and from a cost perspective. So that that's, we need to do what's accessible and scalable and not cost prohibitive for our users. So VeChain fits all of those. And the amount of the resourcefulness from your side, the availability from you and from Perkins, and the documentation you have, and the ability for us to use the sandbox. We also have flexibility with the API and the SDK, and so it's kind of from like one startup to another. I mean, I know you guys are much more advanced and bigger than we are, but the startup culture is there, and the drive is there. So for us, it's been very smooth and comfortable from our side. And so that was
Yeah.
really that was became clear every time we spoke. But it's a big reason why. Yeah, all of
Yeah,
those.
I was very proud of that. I mean, we started talking, VeChain, and my team and your team started talking, I think early in 2019, and you guys were continuing to evaluate the services in the market. You looked at a lot of different traceability platforms. There are several out there in the marketplace, and you guys evaluated all of them. I remember having a conversation with your CEO where he was basically like, look, we've looked at the big guys and the little guys, and we've tried some things here and we've tried some things there. And, all roads just keep coming back to VeChain. So let's just do this. And, I'm very proud that, because, I've gotten to know your team, and I have a lot of respect for your team, and for yourself and your CEO. And I know that, to pass that bar wasn't an easy task. And so, I think that for VeChain overall, 2019 was still sort of a stealth year for us. But I think 2020 has brought us a lot more visibility, and will continue to do so. So my hope is that, more companies have the same insights that you had, and I'm glad to hear from you that, we pride ourselves on being easy to deploy and cost effective and scalable. Those are three things. We're an effective application that's easy to deploy, easy to scale, cost effective. I think that, you're sort of, bringing those points to life. So I'm very, very proud of that, and very glad about that. We have an interesting question here coming in from the audience about implementing traceability processes. Do you think that consumers, so the question is, implementing traceability processes like Storybird, they cost money from the enterprise point of view. Enterprises, as a consequence, have to raise prices of goods or to reduce margins to cover those costs. Do you think that consumers globally are willing to pay more because of the additional information that a solution like Storybird provides?
So it's a great question, and there's a lot of aspects there. Depends on which market we're talking about. In the United States, I would like to say, in certain markets, a lot of specialty markets, yes, for sure. Like, in California, New York, Colorado, places like that. If the consumer has a choice of like two products that essentially are the same, and one, you can look at every ingredient and see where it came from, and who grew it, and then it costs 20 cents more than this product that tells you absolutely nothing. I'd hope people would choose this one, but not everybody can. So people will still inevitably choose the one that's cheaper, that has zero information. It will still happen. However, what's interesting is that the cost doesn't always have to, the price of this product doesn't always have to increase because of this. So the brands and the retailers are the ones who are paying for Storybird as a SaaS model, and they already have marketing budgets. And so at least to start, we're working with brands and retailers who have already factored in a marketing budget for the year, and this is just a piece of it. And we're learning as we're going. So we're learning that every single. So we're choosing great stories to move on from our TAPS pilot from last year, and we have a lot of pilots in the pipe right now. Just some of them are like an Australian essential oils company with all these organic essential oils, and it's doing a blend. So there's like five ingredients from 5 different suppliers going into one product, for example. We have a major Central American retailer directly sourcing regional produce, and they want to tell that story. So they want to say, yes, we're buying locally and we're buying direct, and here's the story of those produce producers. Sorry to sound redundant.
Yeah.
We're doing a project with organic cotton coming from India, for a textile company. We're looking at a big one, we're mentioning government or non-government organizations and co-ops, and we have a big one in Costa Rica with several different associations we're talking to that, really trying to prevent fraud and for the Costa Rican coffee brand and their reputation. A lot of, I guess, Guatemalan and Nicaraguan coffee trying to sell as Costa Rican. So fraud prevention is actually a big reason that blockchain comes in too. And you guys have seen that, I'm sure, all over the world with different stories. But like Italian wine, for example, there's a lot of fraud there. Cacao is another big industry that's needs a lot more like storytelling and a lot more proof of just like where the products are actually coming from. We have like a organic.
From my own perspective, as well as I think probably for the interest of the folks at home, you guys operate in so many different verticals and in so many different markets. Do you anticipate a high percentage of those projects having an opportunity for Storybird and for VeChain to play a part?
Oh yeah. So sorry, all the projects I meant are Storybird projects. And yes, VeChain is so we're phasing in blockchain to most of our Storybird pilots. We're starting, depending on what it is, and the client, the customer's availability to create the Storybird, because there's a lot of information we have to gather. Yes, there's an opportunity to include VeChain's blockchain in all of our Storybirds. And that's the intention of many of them. So it depends if it's, for example, let's say there's a region in Italy that has a very specific way of producing cheese that's specific to their region, and they want their cheese, they want the consumers of their cheese to know this process beyond what's on the packaging, or doing their own research. So they might want to just do a Storybird that's not supply chain based, but it's just, really just telling the story of like that ancient way of making the cheese, and the product, the ingredients that go into it, and how it's all made from one area, like everything comes from there. And so that Storybird might not need blockchain to begin with, but then all these supply chain based ones definitely do. And so it's very interesting to see. It's interesting because a lot of the producers we talk to, and then the other stakeholders along the value chain, understand what blockchain is, and the biggest concern is, how do I participate? Like, how do I get my information into the blockchain? And VeChain's made it very easy to do that with a mobile app and a web app, and so it's very exciting for us to take these steps into these different value chains and include blockchain there.
Yeah, you mentioned in one conversation that we had that Producers Market has an interesting model that you use. I think you call it REA, or Resources, Events, and Agents. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how VeChain ToolChain's technical structure mirrors your existing supply chain process?
For sure. Yeah, so this is just this concept of resources, events, and agents, REA accounting. It's been around for a long time, and we've been talking about it for about 2 years almost, and really wanting to work this into um, the first application for us was more along the lines of contracts and smart contracts, because part of our marketplace idea is to provide transparency for wholesale buyers into what they're buying, but also help facilitate the transactions through adding more data validation through blockchain traceability, adding the ability to use digital contracts and smart contracts, adding perhaps third-party logistics providers, trade finance providers, anything that they're going to need to help that transaction take place, because this is most likely a new introduction and they might not have everything set up already. So part of this, the smart contract piece, is where we really wanted to get the REA accounting in there. And I realized after learning VeChain more, especially last year, that the structure of VeChain already represents REA. So for resources, um, these would be the products. VeChain has the VID, the VeChain ID. And then for events, essentially, which are transactions, VeChain has a transaction ID. And then for agents, there's the user ID, which is basically the people or the organizations. And so that was really cool to find out. I don't know, and I don't know if it was intentional or not with VeChain structure, but it was a very nice bonus because we've been thinking about things this way already. And so this is a very logical, pragmatic approach from our side to see in a blockchain structure. So when we're looking inside, VeChain's admin tool, and we're looking at our reports and all the events, it makes sense for us. Okay, this resource had an event between this agent and this agent, and it's pretty obvious. So I hope that
Great.
explains it okay.
It's good to hear. I'll have to ask our CTO Gu whether he was aware of REA accounting and whether that played a part in our product map. But
Yeah,
that's
it would be
it's
interesting to
clear
know.
that there's that synergy. So, interesting question here. How can the synergies of both your organizations create an awareness to get other agricultural producer companies to explore the blockchain space? Is there any plan to get more exposure for this, considering the market is not closely monitored? I think really what I'm going to reformat the question just a little bit, which is to say, traditionally farmers in particular are kind of technology. I don't want to say that they're technology averse. I mean, there's some really interesting things happening in the farming space with automation and with chemicals. I mean, farmers are in some ways very innovative, but at the same time, they don't use technology that doesn't have an immediate benefit. And so I'm wondering, do you think that the programs that Producers Market is bringing by working directly with these farmers, do you think that they're going to see the benefits of blockchain? And do you think that it will, that word will spread about how blockchain can be used to make the farming business, either more profitable or to help them, reach a wider market, et cetera?
Short answer, I'd say yes. We've learned through some of our partnerships that there are a lot of, especially in India, because they're very organized. Like the whole ZBNF project's very organized. They have ledgers, they're physical ledgers. We want to digitize that, of course. But there are a lot of key roles. There's this one group is, I think, coined this title, agripreneur. Essentially, it's somebody who represents these farmers and is able to introduce tools to farmers, but it's all based on trust. So we don't want to be a widget company that comes in and say, use our widget instead of the other one, or here's why you need to use it. It's all based on trust in that community, and who the farmers on the ground, who they know and who they trust. So there's that aspect, but there's also kind of a socializing aspect, but there's also just the financial aspect. Essentially, what farmers do understand is getting more money in their pocket, and perhaps charging a higher premium for their high quality product, but maybe just getting some initial business too. And if that initial business goes well, and the buyer, whoever it might be, if it's a processor or a CPG brand or even a retailer, is able to say, hey, you participated in blockchain by providing us this data. here's, you can even see it online. Here's our whole story, and this has gotten to the hands of these consumers in the United States in this store, and they're like, they're rating it. They're saying, thanks for the high quality cashews, or whatever it is. That yes, they'll continue to want to use blockchain, and for sure, I mean, this is a major shift in the agricultural industry, and we're learning as we're going too. What works and what doesn't, and so I think there's a lot of cultural considerations, a lot of regional considerations. There's the whole transparency isn't. There's a reason there hasn't been transparency in the agricultural industry, unfortunately. It's a lot of people not wanting to identify their sources or explain, where they're buying low so they can sell high to somebody else. And so, it's definitely there are some challenges along the way. However, we think that transparency will win. I mean, we're betting on that, of course, and we're also betting on the growing demand from consumers that they want to know where their food's coming from. And just going back to COVID and this whole experience we're in now, this is really bringing it to the forefront for a lot of businesses, a lot of, not even just agriculture, but a lot of industries in general. People want to know where products come from and what's happening under the hood before they pay for something.
Yeah, I mean, say a little bit more about that. How are you seeing, because obviously the COVID situation has had a big impact on supply chain. As I was saying at the start of the call, I think that, the importance of supply chain transparency is increasing, but I wondered if you had any specific comments on that.
I mean, it's the same thing we've been doing from the beginning. So we haven't seen too much of a change, except for the fact that there are a lot of like 5 or 3 year plans that some businesses have had, including ourselves, that have now being turned into 5-month plans and 3-month plans, such as like a direct to consumer play. So obviously direct to consumer has become, is growing, and there's more demand for it now. So we're just seeing basically a boost and an increase in demand for Storybird. So, we're trying to just organize ourselves enough to make sure we're addressing the appropriate first pilots to go through this phase as we're developing the product. So, I mean, it's consumer demand. It's brands now realizing that they need to be more transparent. It's the retailers seeing the results of the transparent brands and the increased sales. So it's all coming together slowly. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that I was just curious to get your take on COVID and how that works. So yes, that does address it. It's interesting when you talk about the increased transparency of the margins, right? Like an opaque supply chain is a supply chain that can be manipulated or abused, right? And so when we're using supply chain transparency to shine a light on things, it exposes some potential areas where maybe there's excess margin, or where there could be new efficiencies for the consumer. One of the things that that VeChain is and Producers Market are exploring as an initial pilot is a direct-to-consumer brand. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit at a high level about the role of direct-to-consumer as a result of either food safety and COVID, or on the other hand, the increase of transparency, right? Like, I guess my question is, does increased transparency exposing some of those bottlenecks or inefficiencies or unnecessary markups, do you think that this kind of transparency that's driven by Storybird is going to enable direct-to-consumer brands?
Enable direct-to-consumer brands.
Well, like from the perspective that, like, if I guess my thinking is that Storybird plays an important role in direct-to-consumer because, number one, it's exposing where there are bottlenecks, right? And so we're able to shine some light on things. And then on the other hand, maybe we're able to, like traditionally we've relied on the retailer to be the source of trust. Like, I don't know anything about the farmer or the supplier, so I'm going to buy it from Whole Foods, let's say. I trust Whole Foods to make smart decisions. But I guess my question is, does Storybird play a role in giving consumers trust in direct-to-consumer brands And will we see an uptick in direct to consumer possibly as a result of supply chain transparency?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, most definitely. Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, I mean that's the whole goal. The whole goal is building trust between the end consumer and that brand. And there's multiple levels of the brand, because if you're in a store, you're in a retail location like Whole Foods, then yes, you're as a consumer, you're trusting Whole Foods. But then you're also trusting that brand and their label, and you'd hope that Whole Foods trusted them to begin with. But yes, it's all about associating Storybird with transparency and trust, and therefore the participants of Storybird with transparency and trust. And for sure, I think, I mean, we're well, as we're talking about a direct-to-consumer project, in the meat and seafood industry, and
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, so for sure, I mean, because of this, the COVID crisis and where we are today, a lot of retailers are being bypassed with direct-to-consumer projects and options. And so, the ability, if a consumer can order, a box of meat and seafood products that is fully based on transparency, where every single product in that box can be traced back to its origin. Of course, especially in the meat and seafood industry, of course, people are going to want to buy that and potentially pay even more for it. And there's a lot of a lot of competition already out there doing it, but everyone has their own approach to transparency, and has their own approach to the consumer engagement piece, and has their own approach to the traceability piece. And we're pretty confident that our combination of traceability partner, VeChain, our marketing, and our ability to weave these stories together in a consumable way for the end consumer will be profitable, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean that's just one. I'm bringing it up because that's one example of, yes, this traceability and Storybird, paving the way for more direct to consumer options, and not just options, but just companies out there and companies pivoting, trying to navigate these changes here with COVID.
Yes, for sure. And the project that we're exploring is it's an animal protein, direct to consumer animal protein project, and we're very intrigued by that, and we can see the potential to use Storybird and ToolChain for that matter to tell that story to consumers. I'm curious. Ben York asked a very good question. That I think is relevant to this direct to consumer model. From a transparency standpoint, how much data do consumers really want? How does the law of diminishing marginal returns apply to data? And how does that apply to Storybird deciding what and how often data goes on a blockchain and what gets verified? And just to provide a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, you and I have been having a lot of conversations in the last week about, at what degree do we need to provide traceability, right? Like, when, just to educate the folks at home, there's sort of three broad categories that we have to look at. I know all of our token holders in the community are always asking about transactions, right? And transaction activity. And one of the things that, the process that Perkins and I use when we're working with a partner like Alex here is we have to calculate volume, meaning, what's the volume of product shipping? Like if it's packages of meat or shoes, what's the volume there, right? And then, we also need to know what's the level of fidelity? Like, are you tracking individual items, or are you tracking, like big lots, right? And then the third thing is, like, what are the traceability steps? So you need to know how many are we tracing, just one thing, like when it was harvested, or are we looking at harvesting and packaging and shipment and all of that? And so there's a lot of these different factors, and I'm curious, can you share with us, to Ben's point about his questions, how do you make decisions about what exactly is getting tracked and at what level of detail? Is it purely cost driven, or is there like, if cost wasn't an issue, would you trace everything, or are there other factors?
It's a great question. Like I said before, we're learning as we're going, and every product and every value chain is different. For an example, with Taps, the pilot we did, it's a restaurant, right? And this is one ingredient in one dish on a menu with 50 options. So is everyone going to look at every ingredient story for every single dish before they order it? Probably not. They'll be there all day trying to decide what to eat. So there's that consumer education piece before they purchase, but then let's say someone does look at the storyboard and follows the story and does look at the blockchain information and then buys the dish and then is happy with the dish, and then they realize that other dishes have storyboard. They might not go into storyboard and look at it because they've already had a successful experience with it, and so they'll just say, okay, the storyboard's there, they got me the first time, I trust it, and I buy it now. Okay, so there's a fine line there between like overwhelming the consumer with too much data and then building the trust in the beginning with their first experience. But um, you know, we're trying to basically explore and talk to each brand we work with to who's championing their storybird, and say, okay, what who exactly are your end consumers, or who are you targeting, and what is the story you want to tell them, and which pieces of information do you think are important to them? So we do some discovery with them. We also look at what's capturable to begin with, and we're not really worrying about the cost of this too much, because we're trying to learn from getting experience and gathering data. But it's definitely something to consider, because as the volume increases, the cost goes up, and some companies have a bigger barrier to entry from as far as cost goes than others, and we appreciate that VeChain is low, and so we're able to experiment more. And as far as how we make those decisions, though, it's really it's complex, and so we're trying to figure out how we make them, honestly. And it's great to know, to work with you guys though too, and get some of your experience from from your other partners, and so you can tell us this is what worked for this kind of value chain, and this project and that product in that area of the world, and we can take that information and use it as another data point in our decision making. But yeah, we don't need to go into, I mean, some products will have like temperature sensitive data that makes sense, for a wholesale buyer or a retailer, but not necessarily for the end consumer. There'll be, and Jason, you brought up food safety before. It's interesting because I feel like a lot of the blockchain traceability applications have been working backwards from food, like an outbreak, let's say. And so there's a food safety issue. And so everybody, starting with the retailer, needs to go backwards in the supply chain and start pointing the finger somewhere else. It wasn't us, it went over there. Oh, it wasn't us either, it went over there. And trying to identify where it was, to at least decrease the waste that's happening after all these, warnings of don't eat the spinach from there, this lettuce from there, and trying to trace it back, so at least we can identify where it came from. But it's all come backwards, and so we're trying to take kind of a different approach and come, from the upstream, and say, okay, from the producer's side, we're tracking everything, so if there is a food safety issue, we've already done all the work. You don't have to go backwards. And yeah, I hope that answers your question.
So there's some question here about Producers Market generally. As you mentioned, we're both startups. Producers Market is a relatively nascent company, but shows a lot of promise. What is the long-term plan and vision for the company? And I'm curious, where do you think, as you roll out Storybird and you become experts in this particular capability around traceability and storytelling, where do you see Producers Market going? You mentioned it earlier in the conversation a little bit about supply chain finance. What do you think is, the long-term picture, and is our marketplace is going to play an important role for you, or do you think it's more about the marketing? Just kind of curious where you think things are headed.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. Well, I mean, we're going forward as planned as far as building out our digital marketplace, right? And we used our original business model is to take a small transaction fee from all those transactions. We waive that. We just want everybody who's willing, all the good, brands who are willing to brands and producers who are willing to participate in transparency. We want them to allow us to help them do that. So they can, we're still supporting our organization profiles, our product profiles. We'd like to, again, still continue down the path of, offering tools that help facilitate those transactions, like everything I mentioned before, the smart contracts, logistics, trade finance. And we've been exploring partnerships along the way, but it just hasn't been at the forefront yet. So in this bigger market linkage idea of linking different stakeholders in this agricultural ecosystem with one another, we're still doing that and making introductions. And so we're building that along. However, Storybird is really our main connection to the end consumers. And it's really like a more robust way for a brand or a retailer to tell that story. So we hope to have lots of Storybirds for the organizations who are already starting their pilots with one product, to expand out into other products, and for us to just learn from it along the way. Which ones increase sales, which ones increase their social media followers, whatever it is that they're after, which ones increase their consumer engagement. And so, we continue to do that. We have an aspect of the business I mentioned before, something around master planning, which we're helping with in India. And we just want to keep developing these partnerships, around the globe, and offer, transparency into the products and telling those stories, but also access to markets for those who otherwise don't have it. So those, from my side, those are the two kind of main things we want to continue doing.
Got it. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for the folks at home, we have we're going to be wrapping up here shortly. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, either to Alex or to myself, feel free to shoot those over. Let's see. Someone asks, can you tell us a little bit more about the animal protein project that you're working on? Anything that you can share with us that maybe you haven't shared already? Or obviously, people are curious to know what we're working on.
Yeah, I mean, the project's in early phases, so I can't disclose too much. However, we can say, the idea is to offer, blockchain-based traceability and transparency on every single product and every single piece that goes into this box that's going to be shipped from an e-commerce site to the end consumer, their home or office, wherever they are. That's about all I can say at this point. Sorry.
That's fine with me. So cool. Thank you for saying that. Another question that we have here, you mentioned India and Latin American countries. The Medium article or press release that came out this week talked a little bit about your work in the Caribbean. What markets are you prioritizing first, or are you trying to cover as many regions as possible simultaneously? And it's a great question. When I first started working with you guys, you were working, in Brazil and the Philippines and India, and you have projects going all over the place. And I'm just curious, like, how do you prioritize which markets that you operate in? And, do you feel that you have a particular strength in one market or another?
Gosh, that'd be a great question for our CEO, Keith, because he's leading those efforts. But how do we prioritize them? I mean, it's kind of, we're having we're getting introduced. We just have a lot of introductions being sent to us with either, organizations or even governments themselves. And it's either, their food minister or their health minister. And it's someone who, let's say they want to digitize all the products being sold out of their country, or in the Caribbean, there's a lot of like food resiliency efforts happening also with the UN. And, they want to figure out how can we like digitize the food that's already being produced in this area, but then also organize it. So we're not like we're not importing something we're already producing, around the corner, just because we're selling it to somebody else for a higher price, And so there's a lot of, in the Caribbean, I mean, Jamaica is one country we've been talking to, and as far as prioritizing, each project or each effort we come into contact with has their own degree of communication and sense of urgency, let's say. So to be transparent, in India, it's a longer term plan. It's not like next month. We're talking about next year and the year after, and even a few years down the road. The Caribbean, I'm not sure what the timeline is, to be honest, but there's a very cool project happening there too, and we're just one player amongst many there. So it's tough. I mean, when we're looking at something smaller where we have direct contact with a lot of the stakeholders for example, from the Storyboard perspective, but there's 4 or 7 stakeholders in just this one product's supply chain. We have to be in touch with all of them pretty much, at least at some point, and make sure we're getting their information, making sure it's accurate, making sure it's presentable, and then weaving it all together. And it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of time to gather all that, the media, and get the story straight, and make sure we're representing them accurately, and onboarding them to a blockchain tool that they probably haven't used before. So
Yeah. There's
yeah,
I'm sure there's a lot of market education and partner education that has to occur there.
for sure.
Good. Well, Alex, well, listen, thank you for taking the time to join us today, and for sharing with myself and with the VeChain community about the project and your perspective. I think that again, the synergies between your mission and our platform I think are very powerful. And I'm very, very excited about your global footprint, the types of organizations that you're working with, and just the partnership and the synergy between our organizations. So thank you again for taking the time to join us today, and I'll see you on our weekly calls.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having us, and thank you everybody for listening. Appreciate everything.
Great. Bye, everybody. Thank you for dialing in. Thanks, Alex. Be in
Take care.
touch. Be on Twitter. Bye.